Hi everyone. What I'm going to show you here is a neat little trick for learning your exact values. Rather than having to memorize all 15 of them, you can actually use your hand to work out sine, cos and tan of any of the basic angles in quadrant 1. Now I didn't come up with this hand trick, but I think it's a great place to start learning your exact values. And hopefully, with repetition, you'll have these values nailed in no time. So here's how we start. I'm using my left hand, but you could easily use your right hand. It doesn't matter. You need to label each of the digits on your hand with each of the 5 angles. So starting with your thumb, we work anti-clockwise. 0, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90 degrees. Or if you're working in radians, that will be 0, pi on 6, pi on 4, pi on 3, and pi on 2. Now, if you're just starting to use radians and they're still a little bit foreign to you, think of them in terms of fractions. So we've got a sixth, smaller than a quarter, smaller than a third, smaller than a half. Now, when we read our hand, we're going to read sine in an anti-clockwise direction, or if you're thinking on a unit circle, we're working in the positive direction. So sine always starts at 0, and we're going to move in this direction across our hand. Cosine, or cos, is going to be in the opposite direction. So we're going to start at 90 and work in this direction, like so. Now I know that doesn't make any sense at the moment, it will when we do an example, but it's important to keep in mind for later. The next thing that you need to do is imagine a horizontal line cutting across your hand, so somewhere in the middle of your hand or down by your wrist. This is going to form the center line of our fraction. So underneath that fraction symbol, we're going to have the number 2. It's always a number 2. All you have to remember is the number 2, and that's going to sit on the denominator. Now above this line on the numerator, we're going to have a square root sign. So if you can imagine that sitting over the top of your fingers, that's going to help us when we're working out our answers. So let's start with an example. Let's say we're looking for sine of 30 or cos of pi on 6. Now it doesn't matter whether you're working with degrees or radians or you're working with sine or cos, the process is the same. So what we need to do is locate 30 degrees or pi on 6, which you can see here is my index finger, and we're going to fold that one down. Okay, so sine of 30. So let's start by setting up this structure for our fractional answer. So what we do is we take this to the line and the square root sign, and we set that up there. That's going to be the structure for our answer. Now remember I said that sine starts from 0 and works in a positive direction. So what I'm going to do is count the fingers or the digits starting from 0, and I stop when I get to the finger that's been folded under. So as you can see here, I've got one finger on the right hand side of that finger that's been folded under. So the number that goes under the square root sign is a 1. So sine of 30 degrees is root 1 on 2. Now the square root of 1 is just 1, so sine of 30 degrees is a half. If you're working in radians, it's exactly the same thing, because we've got pi on 6 here, which has been folded under, and we're counting sine, so we're going in this direction, and I've just got one finger on the right hand side there, so sine of pi on 6 is also a half. If we're working with cos, so cos of 30 degrees, we're going to count the fingers in this direction and stop when we get to the finger that is folded down. So as you can see, we've got 1, 2, 3 fingers on the left hand side of the finger that's folded down. So cos of 30 degrees is square root of 3 on 2. Cos of pi on 6 will be the same thing. Now to work out tan, we use that identity that tan of an angle equals sine of the angle over cos of the angle. So instead of writing it out as a fraction, I'm going to write it out in using this symbol here, because I'm about to use some fractions. So sine of 30 degrees is a half from up here, and cos of 30 degrees is root 3 on 2. So with my fractions written out in this form, I can turn that division sign into a multiplication sign and flip these ones over, do a bit of cross cancelling, and you'll see we get tan of 30 degrees is 1 on root 3. Now we like to have that with a rational denominator, so I'm going to multiply that by root 3 on root 3, and I get root 3 on 3. So tan of 30 degrees is root 3 on 3. Likewise, tan of pi on 6 is also root 3 on 3. Let's do another one. So So we go back to our hand with all of the angles marked on there like so. Now if you're in the exam, you would just imagine those numbers sitting in order there. Now let's say we wanted sine of pi on 4 or sine of 45 degrees or cos of 45 degrees. We need to locate the finger that has the 45 degrees or pi on 4 if you're working in radians, and we're going to fold that finger under. As before, we need to imagine that horizontal line and the 2 sitting underneath it and the square root sign sitting over the top. So sine of pi on 4, we're going to count the digits going in this direction here and stop when we get to the finger that's been folded underneath. So sine of pi on 4 is the square root of 1, 2. So square root of 2 on 2, and that's it. If we want sine of 45 degrees, it'd be the same thing. If we're working with cosine or cos of 45 degrees, we're going to count the number of digits going in this direction and stop when we get to the finger that's been folded underneath. So cos of 45 is the square root of 1, 2. So square root of 2 on 2. Cos of pi on 4 will be the same thing. Tan of 45, we use that identity of sine of 45 divided by cos of 45, which is root 2 on 2 divided by root 2 on 2. Flip that over and do a bit of cross cancelling and you'll see that the answer is 1. So tan of 45 is 1, or likewise tan of pi on 4 is 1. One last example. Let's say we wanted sine of 0 or cos of 0. Well, there's our 0 digit, so we're going to fold that one underneath and set up my structure. So I've got sine of 0 equals square root of something over 2. Now if I'm working with sine, I'm counting the digits that are on the right hand side of my thumb. But as you can see, I don't have any digits on the right hand side of my thumb. So under the square root symbol here, I'm going to put a 0. So sine of 0 is 0. Cos of 0 is the square root of the number of fingers over 2. So if I count from 90 degrees coming in this direction, you can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 digits on the left hand side of the finger that's folded down. So I've got the square root of 4 on 2. The square root of 4 is 2. 2 on 2 equals 1. Tan, we're going to use sine divided by cos. So I've got 0 divided by 1, which is 0. And that's it. I hope you found that helpful.